Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. But before we jump into this very exciting topic, are you new to my channel? Welcome! I release videos on Mondays and on Thursdays, so make sure you're subscribed and have those notifications turned on so that you don't miss out. Now, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, or DMDD, is part of the depressive disorder section of the DSM, and its core feature is chronic, severe, persistent irritability. And it's important to note that the symptoms must be present before a person is 10 years old, but cannot be diagnosed before the age of 6. So there's kind of this window where it can happen. Now, obviously, most children will throw tantrums from time to time and go through periods where they're way more irritable than they used to be. But when these tantrums become more frequent, intense, and ongoing, it could be DMDD. But that's why it's so important that we see a mental health professional. We need to ensure that our child is being properly diagnosed and treated. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty. And in order for a child to be diagnosed with DMDD, they must meet the following criteria. Number 1, they must have a severe recurrent temper outbursts that are manifested verbally, like screaming verbal rages, and or behaviorally, showing physical aggression towards people or damaging property, that are grossly out of proportion in intensity or duration to the situation or provocation, which really just means that the child's upsets are way more intense than the issue itself warrants, and they last for a much longer time than normal. Number 2, the temper outbursts are inconsistent with developmental level. Remember, they have to be over 6, so terrible 2s or 3s is not what we're talking about. Number 3, the temper outbursts occur on average 3 or more times per week. 4, the mood between temper outbursts is persistently irritable or angry most of the day, nearly every day, and is observable by others, like parents or teachers. So this means that those with DMDD are never really happy or easygoing. And number 5, the criteria 1 through 4 that I just talked about, have to have been present for 12 or more months. And throughout that time, the individual has not had a period lasting 3 or more consecutive months without all of the symptoms in those 4 criteria. So it must just be pervasive. It's happening most of the time, all the time for a year. Number 6, criteria 1 through 4 are present in at least 2 of 3 settings, like home, school, and with peers, and are severe in at least 1 of those settings, meaning that they can't just be upset and are throwing tantrums because they really don't like that one teacher at school or a certain peer. Their tantrums happen wherever they are, regardless of setting and people. Number 7, the diagnosis should not be made for the first time before the age of 6 or after the age of 18. And number 8, by history or observation, the age of onset of the criteria before 1 through 6 is before 10 years, meaning that even if we're over 18 and we're in seeing a clinician, if a parent can recall times when we met the criteria, when we were, let's say, 8 years old, then a diagnosis can be given. But if the behavior didn't happen before we were 10, then it's most likely something else. And number 9, there has never been a distinct period lasting more than 1 day during which the full symptom criteria, except duration, for a manic or hypomanic episode have been met. So we don't want this to be like bipolar disorder. This is very different. And finally, the behaviors do not exclusively occur during an episode of major depressive disorder, because we all know how depression can cause us to be really, really irritable. And it's also very important to know that this diagnosis cannot coexist with oppositional defiant disorder, intermittent explosive disorder, or bipolar disorder. If someone meets the criteria for ODD and DMDD, they should be given the diagnosis of DMDD, okay? So if they have oppositional defiant disorder, which I have a video about that if you're wondering what I'm talking about, you can click the link in the description. But if they have the symptoms of that, but also meet the criteria for DMDD, they're only given the DMDD diagnosis, okay? I know this is kind of difficult to follow sometimes, but however, if they do meet the criteria for both DMDD and bipolar disorder, they're only given the bipolar disorder diagnosis. So these are just things as a clinician that we have to take into consideration to make sure we're giving our clients the proper diagnosis and we're taking into consideration all their symptoms. It's what we call differential diagnosis. Now, DMDD was added to the DSM-5. It came out in 2013, remember, because a lot of mental health professionals were concerned that children were being misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder when they really felt that something else was going on. Therefore, it's important that those 2 diagnoses, bipolar disorder and DMDD, are thoroughly considered and ruled out or ruled in based on that particular child's symptomology. Since this diagnosis is most often given to children, the treatment needs to be individualized for that child and work for them at home and at school. This means that we may, as a therapist and as a parent, will have to work with the school to ensure they receive an IEP, which stands for an Individualized Education Plan, or a 504, or whatever their specific school offers to children who have certain needs. And it's also important that parents of a child with DMDD ask as many questions as they need to in order to fully understand what their child is going through and what this diagnosis really means to their child and to their situation and everything they're experiencing. Therapy can be beneficial both individually with the child and as a family, part of family therapy, so that all who live with the child can better manage the symptoms, since they can be very disruptive and upsetting or even violent at times. Behavioral-based therapies tend to work best. Think CBT or DBT. Those B's in there stand for behavioral. And it's also recommended that parents go through their own parent training to ensure they know how to act when their child is throwing a tantrum. Understanding effective ways to respond to irritable behavior, such as even anticipating events that might lead a child to have a temper outburst and working ahead to avoid the outburst. Training also focuses on the importance of predictability, being consistent with children, and rewarding positive behavior. And this is great when their child is also in therapy. You can work together, so we have the parents getting training, the child is learning their own techniques, and together we can better manage the symptoms. Medication has also been shown to be effective when treating specific symptoms of DMDD. And again, just make sure you ask all the questions that you may have about it. Understand what the side effects look like so you can look out for them, as well as whether or not you want to try medication at all. It's always the patient's choice because it's their life and their symptoms. And the medication types that, they talk about and say have been found to be helpful are antidepressants, some stimulants, and atypical antipsychotics. But as always, ensure that the treatment you or your child is receiving is what's best. This video has been brought to you by the Kenyans on Patreon. If you would like to support the creation of these mental health videos, click the link in the description and check it out. Because medication isn't best for everyone, but if we have symptoms that won't go away and the behavioral techniques are just not happening, know that it's another option. But what do you think? Have you or someone you love been diagnosed with DMDD? What helped them most? Are there things that I left out? Let me know what your thoughts are on this in those comments down below, and I will see you next time.